Why? This was Ohio, where the winters could be brutal, so I had been told. It made no sense to cut off a means of heating the house. Well, the chimneys would have to be unsealed eventually. About a week after our arrival, I woke up one night with a sudden start. Looking over at the bedside clock, I saw that it was 2:09 a.m. I wasn't sure what had awakened me until I heard what sounded like scratching. My wife was beside me, snoring softly. She liked to wear earbuds so she could listen to music as she fell asleep, so the sound hadn't roused her. But both dogs were awake, lying between my wife and me on the bed. They stared in the direction of the open bedroom door, deep grumbling emanating from their chests. Upon moving in, we had installed a dog door for them that led into the backyard. Had an animal gotten inside through it? Reluctantly getting out of bed, I grabbed my phone and turned on its light before heading out into the hallway. I kept hearing the scratching sound. Sometimes it sounded like it was coming from a different room or from inside the walls. Sometimes it sounded like it was in front of me, and other times behind me. I never could pinpoint the direction it came from. I went down to the first floor to look around, but the scratching had stopped by then, and I found nothing. Despite a sense of unease in the pit of my stomach, I went back to bed. I don't know how much I slept that night, since my brain kept me on alert in case the sound resumed, or in case a rabid raccoon decided to pounce on me. Over the next 2 weeks, I heard that scratching on and off during the night. Each time it woke me up at 2:09 a.m. Sitting up, I would always find the dogs staring out of the bedroom door, making their deep, angry growls. October arrived faster than I had anticipated. The weather grew chilly and the leaves turned from green into all sorts of reds and yellows. It was beautiful to see. I had never experienced a Midwestern fall, but I'd heard stories. I just didn't know if my Californian biology was ready. I decided it was time to unseal the chimneys, so we were prepared in case the old furnace pooped out during the cold weather. We started with the main one in the foyer. We had hired Jared, a handyman, a week prior to help us with the ongoing work on the castle. To be honest, my wife and I were not the most knowledgeable about house repair, so Jared became a huge help. We hired him because he had been the only person out of all the handymen we called who had been willing to come. Everyone else made excuses about being busy after I gave them our address. Looking back, it was weird, but at the time, I was so distracted with working on the house, I didn't dwell on it. The first weekend of October, I asked Jared if he could unseal the foyer fireplace. His expression grew grim for some reason, but he assured me he could do it. After grabbing a hammer and chisel from his truck, Jared set about breaking through the concrete seal. I left him to it and went upstairs to where I set up my office to work on a few things. The idea of my wife and I cuddling on a comfy couch before a big roaring fire in that gorgeous fireplace had put me in a good mood. It wasn't even 20 minutes later when I heard a heavy thud from downstairs, followed by loud cursing. The dogs, who had been sleeping at my feet, both jumped up and began barking like maniacs. As I rushed out of my office and reached the stairs, the most horrid smell I'd ever had the misfortune to inhale assaulted my nostrils. I had to pull my shirt up over my nose, and my vision blurred as my eyes watered. Downstairs, I saw that Jared had broken through the chimney's seal, the concrete lying in pieces on the fireplace floor. The dogs ran over to the edge of the hearth, the fur on their backs puffed up, and barked their fool heads off. I couldn't get them to quiet down, so I locked them in a bathroom, all the while trying to keep my nose and mouth covered. Not that it was really helping. Once the dog's noise was contained, I asked Jared what was going on. He stood on the threshold of the front door, gagging and spitting. He told me how he had worked on many houses over his career and had found his fair share of dead animals. But none of them had been as rancid as the smell that was coming out of that fireplace. With the flashlight from my phone, I knelt into the fireplace and looked up inside the chimney. The stench was hellish. A yawning black hole greeted me. There really wasn't much else to see, besides scorched brickwork that went upward several feet before a 45-degree angle took the rest of the chimney duct out of sight and into a darkness that seemed to swallow my light. I proceeded to open all the first-floor windows and doors in an attempt to vent that putrid odor. It hadn't dissipated much when my wife got home an hour later. She was nearly knocked off her feet as she walked inside and the reek smacked her in the face. Jared called Pete, a chimney sweep friend of his, since the fireplace would need a good cleaning before it could be safely used, and he could get rid of whatever dead animal was stinking up the place. He stepped outside onto the front porch to make the call. Through the open door, I heard what sounded like a heated whispered conversation he was having on the phone that seemed to switch between arguing and pleading. After coming back in, he let me know that the chimney sweep would be coming by the next day. By the time I went to bed that night, the smell had lessened somewhat. As my eyes grew heavy, I noticed that the dogs were still awake and alert, their ears perked up as if listening for something. I didn't hear anything, so I figured there must have been something out in the yard drawing their attention. I woke up in the middle of the night, like I had several times before, at 2:09. This time it wasn't because of any scratching. The dogs were still awake, their ears perked. Had they slept at all? That was when I noticed how cold it was. The house was like a freezer. Maybe a door or window had been left open downstairs from when I was trying to get rid of the stink. I went downstairs to check everything out. Everything was shut tight. The weirdest thing, though, was that it was coldest right in front of the foyer fireplace. Another problem that needed fixing. Pete the chimney sweep came the next morning. He brought with him enough ladders to make his way to the top of the house, as well as one of those cameras attached to the end of a long cable so he could see what was in there and how far down it was. I asked if he needed any help since Jared wasn't there that day. He said he was fine, so I went back inside where I had been arranging stuff in the kitchen cupboards. I hadn't even put 2 plates away when I heard a yell, and a split second later, I saw Pete plummet past the kitchen window. The sound of his body smacking against the ground is something I'll never forget. I rushed outside with my wife right behind me. Pete was conscious, though not responding to anything I was saying. As my wife called 911, I kept trying to talk to him in an attempt to keep him awake. A red puddle formed in the grass around his head. The emergency responders arrived in no time, and took Pete away in an ambulance. As they were loading him in, the man looked at me and started to mumble something. I stepped over to his side, but the only thing I managed to make out from his hoarse whispers were the words eyes and hair. My wife was shaken by the experience, and I couldn't blame her. So was I, down to my core. Later that day, when one of Pete's co-workers came to collect his truck and equipment, we learned that the poor man hadn't made it. The doctors had done everything they could, but Pete's head injury had been too severe, and he had passed away. I couldn't sleep that night, instead sitting up in bed and looking at my phone. I was trying to distract myself. The image of Pete lying on the ground in a pool of blood was burned into my brain. I had never seen something like that happen before in real life. A heavy rock had formed in my stomach, making me feel nauseous every time I thought about the incident. Needing a glass of water, I headed downstairs, but as soon as I stepped off the last step and turned on the foyer light, a frigid wind swept over me from the direction of the fireplace. I spun around and stared. What I expected to see, I don't know. The chandelier needed some better bulbs, because they couldn't illuminate the inside of the fireplace, leaving shadows so thick, I could have sworn they were solid. With slow steps, I moved closer until my toes almost touched the green tile of the hearth. My phone was upstairs. I berated myself for leaving it in bed. As I stood there, trying to see into the shadows of the fireplace, I felt myself shivering. Cold air came out from that darkness in puffs. There was a sort of rhythm to it, I realized. I stepped onto the hearth and knelt down, leaning closer and squinting in the dim light. Either my eyes were playing tricks on me, or there was a subtle movement in those fireplace shadows, like the blackness was actually some viscous liquid. Something compelled me to reach out my hand. I can't say what exactly. The cold air that was coming out of the chimney had seeped down into my bones, and I shivered even more. I was about to stick my shaking hand inside the fireplace when a sudden noise on either side of me caught my attention and brought me to my senses. The dogs had come down, and both of them were staring straight into the fireplace as well, growling loudly. I got back to my feet and we hurried back upstairs, the 3 of us getting back into bed. Still shivering, I got under the covers to warm up and checked my phone. The clock display rolled over from 2:09 to 2:10. Our town has a historical society, so I went there the next day to see if they had any information on the house. I had no idea what kind of information I was looking for, but I needed to know more about our new home. Unfortunately, when I got there, the lady at the front desk told me how there had been a fire in the 70s that had destroyed a large portion of the Historical Society's records. Disheartened but determined, I asked her if she could look to see if there was anything on my house. The moment I told her my address, I watched as the smile disappeared from her face. The castle was well known in town, she told me, which was no surprise. All older documents relating to the castle had been lost in the fire, but she could tell me the basic history of the house, which had become something of a local legend by this time. It had been built in 1908 for a lumber baron by the name of Joseph Murray, who had moved in with his wife Margaret, two young sons, Matthew and Daniel, and Joseph's elderly mother Enid. They lived happily in the castle for about 5 years until, one night, according to Joseph's later statement to the police, he woke up in the middle of the night, hearing the grandfather clock in the foyer chime 2 o'clock. He had tried to get back to sleep, but noted a frigid temperature in the room, accompanied by what smelled like rotten meat. About 10 minutes later, he was startled by sudden shrieking. That night, Daniel and his grandmother Enid had disappeared from the house. No trace of them was ever found. The second son, Matthew Murray, inherited the house in 1926 after his father passed away. His mother had died a few years earlier. He had married a woman named Lily Abner that same year, honeymooning in Paris. The very day they came back, however, tragedy again struck the Mays. Matthew would go on to tell the authorities that he awoke that night a little after 2 o'clock in the morning. The room was like an icebox with a putrid odor hanging in the air. He noticed that Lily was not beside him in bed. That was when the hellish screaming began. Leaping out of bed, Matthew rushed downstairs, but, according to his account, as soon as he set foot in the foyer, the screaming abruptly stopped. Lily was nowhere in the house, and despite efforts by local police and the community, she was never seen again. For years, Matthew lived alone in the house, his mind fractured, so the townspeople said. He refused to leave the house or sell it. He refused to believe Lily had simply left him and moved elsewhere. On a warm July night in 1938, neighbors heard the sound of gunfire at around 2 o'clock in the morning. When police came to investigate, they found no one in the castle. Long, coarse hairs, and some blood splatter on the hearth of the foyer fireplace were the only things out of place in the entire house. Explanations for the blood and hair ranged from crazed maniacs and rabid animals to more fantastical things like monstrous beasts and evil spirits. Matthew never reappeared. As I left the Historical Society, I wondered what I was supposed to do with this information. It was obvious to me now why the castle had been so cheap, and why nobody had snatched it up. But how much was true and how much was just town folklore? I didn't say anything about the story to my wife. There was no point in worrying her. Not until I figured out what I needed to do. I'm never going to forgive myself for not taking things seriously, and getting us out of that house as soon as possible. That night, I awoke once more to the sound of scratching coming from seemingly nowhere and everywhere. Grabbing my phone, I saw that it was 2:09 in the morning, as I had come to expect by that time. It was at that moment that I heard my wife start screaming. I had never heard her scream before, but I knew it was her. She wasn't in bed beside me, and neither were the dogs. I could hear their furious barking mixed in with the shrieking, and I exploded out of bed, sprinting down to the first floor. The entire house was like a freezer with a familiar stench thick in the air. As soon as I reached the foyer, I hit the light switch. When the lights came on, I caught a brief glimpse of something dark retracting up into the chimney. Just a small, black blur of motion, the dogs barking after it. Had it been a foot? A hand? I don't know. Whatever it was, it left behind a clump of dark, greasy hair that smelled rancid. It was not my wife's hair. The dogs refused to even sniff it. I searched the entire house while I waited for the cops, the dogs at my side, but I couldn't find my wife anywhere. Neither could the police. 5 officers combed the entire property, finding nothing. It's been over a week now. The police have made no progress in finding my wife. I don't want to lose hope, but the guilt and fear and desperation are crushing me. Every night at 2:09, I sit in front of the fireplace waiting for something to happen, though I don't know what I'm expecting. I would do anything to get my wife back, but what can I do? Every night at 2:09, the house grows cold, that rotten smell flows out of the fireplace to fill every room, and I hear scratching. There's something new though. Along with the scratching, I've been hearing a faint sound coming from up inside the foyer fireplace. I swear what I hear is whispering, though I can't make out any words. Sometimes there's also what I believe to be quiet laughing. It could be my imagination. Or not. I'm writing this down because I feel like I'm going crazy, and so there is a record of events. Last night, when I went down to sit in front of the fireplace, I found my wife's wedding ring on the hearth. A lock of those dirty, disgusting hairs were tied around it. I'm thinking of climbing up into the chimney, I have to. Even though I'm afraid of what I'll find.